During my first 2 years of theology, I was not allowed to come home. It was part of the program that you stayed away and explored the world and learned how to, be miserable away from home, I guess. But as I got closer to that second summer, I started looking forward and getting excited about coming home to the promised land of South Louisiana, visiting my family and friends that I hadn't seen in so long. And in April of that year, right before I came home, I got a call very early one morning from my sister. So I came home from class and I saw that she had called. So I said, ooh, she must be pregnant. So she's calling to let me know. And I was all excited. So I called her back and she wasn't pregnant. And I wasn't excited at why she was calling me, because she was calling me to tell me that my dad was in the hospital. He had a heart block and his heart had stopped for, 20 or 22 seconds. They had to revive him and he ended up getting a pacemaker and everything was okay. It was kind of a traumatic experience, especially for my dad. And he likes to remember this and remind other people of this, especially my mom. Whenever he wants to do something or wants to buy something, and he knows that she's going to get upset about it, he always sort of plays this card. He says, babe, I could have died. I need to do this. I have to live while I can and enjoy it while I can. If we know anybody that's had one of these tragic or traumatic experiences and have been close to dying, we know and we see that they live differently. Right? They don't hold back. They take advantage of the time that they have. We can certainly say this about St. Paul. That second reading, St. Paul is writing towards the end of his life, writing to Timothy, instructing him on how to be a minister to God's people. And he's telling him, he's recalling the events of his life. And so he's saying, I've already been poured out like a libation. Right? I have already spent myself in working to proclaim the gospel. Right, I've done all that I could. And we know that he's done this, right? In one of the accounts that I read, his 3 missionary journeys that he went on, Paul traveled over 10,000 miles. Which for us, 21st century Americans, might not sound like that much. But for a first century Jew, with no car, with no airplane, right, with a ship and his feet, this was an incredible distance. And Paul tells us that it wasn't easy traveling. He tells us elsewhere that 3 times he was shipwrecked, that he was imprisoned, he was beaten, and we know that he finally died by being beheaded. Right, that he went through a lot of incredible hardship, and all for the sake of proclaiming the gospel. And so we can ask ourselves, and we should ask ourselves, why? What is it that made Paul so enthusiastic about proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ? Well, Paul realized that he had received a gift. And the gift that he received is the gift of justification. Right? Justification in this sense means that he went from being a sinner to being saved. He went from being a sinner to being inheriting the life of holiness. He went from being a sinner, one who was dead, to truly living. Right? He received the gift of life. Right? Just like my dad, who was dead for a period of time, Paul was dead. We were dead in sin. And Christ redeemed us. Right? Through his sacrifice on the cross, Christ gave us life. We were justified. And so Paul, recognizing this, worked himself to death for the sake of the gospel. And we have to do the same. Right? We have to realize that we've been given life. We shouldn't have it. We can't have it on our own. It was a gift from God. And so we have to work to proclaim the gospel just like Paul. And we all probably know someone who is sort of crazy like Paul was, right? Proclaiming the gospel and wearing themselves out for the sake of it. On Friday, I went to St. Martinville for spiritual direction with Father Champagne. He was directing me, not I directing him. But he was telling me about his day. And he started the day in Homa, I believe, giving a retreat, which he had been doing the past several days. He finished up with that. He drove to St. Martinville. Then he had to put up with me, which was exhausting in and of itself. And once he was finished with me, he had to take care of things around the community. They were going to have Mass in the afternoon. And then, because he hadn't done enough, he was going to drive to Richard to go and hear confessions at a retreat. And then probably get back late at night, pray a holy hour with the community, do some other work, maybe get some sleep and start all over again. Right? He, like St. Paul, recognizes that he's been given an incredible gift. And he works without stop to proclaim the good news that he has received, right? That through Christ he has received this life. And this is what we are all called to do. Right? Not all of us are called to go around in a ship and proclaim the gospel in that way. But we're all called to respond to this gift that we've been given and to proclaim the good news to people that we encounter. And to do so, we need the example of the gospel. Right? We need the example of that tax collector. Because having the attitude of the tax collector helps us to recognize the gift that we've been given. Right? Notice what the tax collector does. He goes into the temple where the Pharisee is already present. But the Pharisee is not worried about God. He's praying to himself, the gospel tells us. But the tax collector stands at a distance. He recognizes that he's not worthy to be in the presence of God, yet God allows him to be there. And because he recognizes his unworthiness, he doesn't even raise his eyes to heaven. He can't even bring himself to lift his head up because he's in the presence of such a great mystery. And he simply prays, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Right? That has to be our attitude. "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And God has been merciful to us, just like he was merciful to Paul, right? By giving us life in place of death, by giving us this great gift of justification, of salvation through Jesus Christ. And so we pray for the grace to recognize the great gift we've been given so that we can work tirelessly to proclaim the good news to others. And we do that so that at the end of our lives, when we're reflecting on what we've done, like Paul is doing in our second reading, that we can say the same thing that he did. Right? That I have competed well, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith.